With the rebel flag fluttering in the warm breeze, residents of a small town gather for a Southern-style picnic. There's corn on the cob, candy apples, and fried chicken bubbling in the pan. Men kick up their heels while pretty young belles look on. This is the Deep South, the really Deep South, southern Brazil to be exact. And these people are the descendants of rebel soldiers who fled the United States after the Confederacy lost the Civil War. Unlike their parents and grandparents, most young people here speak no English and have never set foot in the United States, but they still feel connected to their American ancestors.
Significa muito.
Dressing up like my great-grandmother and reliving the past makes me appreciate where I came from.
All right, y'all, thank you for tuning in to Dixieland of the Proletariat, where we'll talk about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. Make sure to like us on social media at Dixieland of the Proletariat or Dixie Prol. If you want to give your wages to a bunch of rednecks, then subscribe to our Patreon page at patreon.com/DixieProl. Got a lot of cool stuff to give you, including CDs, stickers, and a cookbook. We also have a Spotify playlist with some great artists you also check out. This podcast is brought to you by Newport 100 in a Box, Camel Silver's Black Coffee, Box Wine, and Sherman's March to the Sea. Shout out to our new Patreon subscribers, Paul and Harrison. Our monthly Patreon surplus goes to groups that are run by and or help marginalized people directly. As always, I'm Nelson with...
Senior Telecommunications Director, Brother William.
I'm Comrade Tommy.
Fuck Nelson. Fuck Nelson. I'm great.
Fuck Nelson.
And our guest this evening is the one and only
Madison Park. I'm hoping that was the right name to give. I'm a little confused, but yeah. Madison Park. Sorry. Yeah. A little bit about myself, I guess. I am currently a PhD student at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, but I am originally from Alabama, where I focus a lot of my research on mid-20th century civil rights. That led me to getting my dual master's in Claremont, California at Claremont Graduate University, dual master's in history and applied women's studies, where I did my research on how patriarchy was enhanced in the Black community during Reconstruction. And that led me to where I am now in Indiana, getting my PhD in African American African diaspora studies with a minor in gender studies. And my research is focusing broadly on late 19th century Brazil and how American influenced race relations, particularly through a group of people called the Confederados.
And that brings us to what the episode is going to be on. And when I first heard about this, Brother William told me about it, the real Brother William. I was shocked because I had never heard about this story in my life. It's one of those things where people are like, we never learned about this in history class. Well, we never learned about this in history class. And it's mind-boggling to me. It's crazy. I thought that only ex-Nazis were the ones that fled to South America after they fucked up. But apparently the Confederates did too. So I don't know. Y'all just want to jump right into the episode? Or do we have anything we want to talk about?
The South setting fucking trends again.
What do we do this time? I've been in a hole for like 2 weeks. So what do we do? I don't have a life.
We were the first war criminals to flee to South America.
Oh, okay. So we are just doing the episode.
Yeah. But quick before we do the episode, Dolly Parton held her shit this week.
Wait, who?
You want to talk about my mom? We're talking about my mom, Dolly Parton, being like, our little white asses are not the only ones that matter. Is that what you want to talk about?
Yes, using her platform for good.
Yeah, she's an angel who, lives off of Velveeta and love, and that's why she is patron saint of Tennessee.
I never really, I don't really know a lot about Dolly Parton. I have nothing against her. I just never, only thing I know was the movie and song 9 to 5. That's about it. So I'm really, really curious now to look more, because it seems like she's a very, big champion when it comes to social justice.
So I believe you mean labor anthem 9 to 5. But yeah, no. So Dolly, preface with no ethical consumption under capitalism, and she owns an empire, and but props to Dolly over the fact that she has. What are you fucking laughing at, Tommy? Why am I being laughed at right now?
We lost Tyler.
We're not laughing at you.
Oh yeah, Tyler.
my
Oh yeah.
God.
By the way, Tyler disappeared. No one's that worried about it because he does that. But yeah, no. Bottom
Here it
line on
comes.
Dolly is she grew up in the woods. She grew up in the hills in the Smoky Mountains, and in a friggin' one-room cabin with a bajillion siblings, and she was the definition of Appalachian poor, and had the great fortune of also being talented. So was able to fight her way out of that poverty, but has turned around and done stuff with that where it's like she's not the wokest person in the world. And I don't think okay, liberals are pretending she's the wokest person in the world because liberals like to create weird cults of personality again around anybody, which they don't do that. But to her credit, this is a woman who has a program where she mails books to every child born in the state of Tennessee, regardless of income, gets access to children's literature through a program that she runs. Some people have issues with that. Some people, but it's ultimately a really positive program.
What?
What?
The book program is not only limited to Tennessee.
It expanded?
Yeah, Lily gets them.
Fuck yeah, she's so cool. Thanks, Dolly. To her credit, long before statue, the tearing down of statues came into play, not that long before, basically concurrent with several years ago, tearing down of statues and re-examining how we acknowledge the Confederacy in popular culture. So this does tie in. She had a restaurant at Dollywood up in Pigeon Forge that was called the Dixie Stampede, and people complained about it. And we're just like, don't call it that. And Dolly's response was, I did not realize I was offending people. I don't set out to piss people off. That's not my intention. I believe that you were correct that this is wrong. It's now just called the Stampede. Didn't push back on it. Didn't try to equivocate. It was just like, oh shit, y'all are right. I'm Dolly Parton. Come eat and come to the Stampede where everyone is welcome. And that was the end of it. And it was it was just kind of like a low key thing to the point where it was it didn't draw that much attention that she did it, because she was just like, oh shit, I can take direction well and move forward. So I'm just glad, to see somebody who, whose audience would stereotypically not be the most progressive people in the world. You'd think that, but then you listen to her lyrics and they probably should be. If you're a diehard Dolly fan, you're probably a good person. You know what I mean? So that's the story of Dolly Parton. And I actually got in a huge fight with a friend about it this week, because he was hating on Dolly super hard, and I very publicly told his fiance when he was on the way to their house to not let him inside until he'd stood in the front lawn and sang Coat of Many Colors to her, but he had to do it sincerely. And that settled that. I was gonna fight people in an alley over Dolly Parton this week.
That's how I am about Michael Jackson every day. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. And now I have a research project in 2023 when I finish my dissertation. Yay.
I'll make you a playlist. Don't even worry about it.
Thank you.
Before we get into it, speaking of super progressive liberals, something fantastic happened this week. Something that warmed my heart to know that the future of this country is going to change. And that is Kamala Harris being the vice president pick for the Democratic Party. Aren't you guys happy?
Yeah.
Can we get a hand clap?
Oh, I've been so looking forward to having to have this conversation in public. Let me tell you.
God, I don't want to talk about it anymore.
I don't want to talk about it anymore. Like, I'm not even kidding. It's like it's to the point where it's just like what's done is done. We all saw this coming. They picked a cop. That's it. You know,
I mean, if you had to write a book on how to lose.
I sincerely feel okay. So I have two things to say on it. I sincerely feel like every day the DNC is like waking up in the morning and rubbing their hands together and very specifically going, how can we dare Kate Malden specifically to like actually engage in a protest vote? I feel like it's a personal attack on me as an individual, or they're just like how like it's a war of attrition of like how they want to see how much I can withstand before I finally pull my vote. And the answer is we might find out. And then number two, as a former campaign strategist, as a former, as a person who's been a field director all across this fucking country, if I were Joe Biden's campaign manager, this is what you all would see until November is absolute silence. There'd be no press conferences. There would be no public statements. There would be no DNC this year. But every 3 days, you would go on Instagram and you would see a photograph of Joe Biden standing in his front lawn holding up that day's newspaper, because I would take all of the campaign funds and I would pay security to round the clock stand around his house to make sure he never left and they had no access to phones or computers and just like no outside access. And then I would send over an intern to just take a picture of him proving he's still alive so that you guys would know that there was still a Democratic candidate. And then we would just, and I feel like a lot more people would be comfortable with voting with him. But I can't, somebody pay me a lot of money and I will get that shit done for you. I promise.
Sounds like a very solid plan. Yeah, I would totally support funding that.
I wouldn't be an ally for reproductive justice if I did not mention this, and I know Mia is very upset about this, but can we just talk? John Kasich is going to be speaking at the DNC when as a keynote when like AOC gets like 60 seconds and no one else in the squad is fucking going to be able to talk. Fucking John Kasich, the Republican that fucking shut down the majority of abortion clinics in Ohio. Like,
y'all get it now, libs? Do you get it?
Listen.
Do you understand what we've been saying this whole time? Do you understand that if I stop calling you libs like in a slurring tone, if I'm just like, hey, registered Democrats, if I just call you that, will you understand like that we're fucking right and that your party has never stood for you and that they've never been left of center, or that at least they haven't been left of center for fucking decades? Like, do you get it? Do you see it? Do you see it now? It's real.
Okay,
it's fucking real.
I don't think you understand that in the state that this country is in, where we want to, defund the police,
the state of denial,
and we want to defund the police. We're protesting cops all across the country. People are turning out in droves, and this is the same party that looked at that and said, "You know what we need? We need a cop for VP. That's what we need."
Dun, dun, dun. All right, y'all. Well, that was great. Let's all, oh, God.
Listeners can't see me, but I am like visibly deteriorating over the course of this conversation.
Kate looks like the woman from The Ring right now. She like just got out of the well. Tyler is pouring another glass of wine. So let's all mute our mics and give this platform to the goddess herself, Madison, who is going to tell us about these Confederados, the original war criminals who fled to South America.
Thank you so much for that. I feel like I should preface this by saying that, one, I have been studying this for approximately 9 months, like a baby. So it's like just now being born. It is focused around a particular, we were just talking about abortions. Isn't that weird taste? Okay, I'm sorry. Rewind. So my research is focusing particularly around two questions. when it comes to Confederados, which I will definitely go into more detail, but just as a umbrella, I'm focusing on how U.S. American influence through the 19th century Confederados, who we'll talk about, affects the nuances of racial identity in Brazil, which is also a big concept we're going to dive into a little bit as well. And what roles do ideas of U.S. exceptionalism and this Brazilian racial democracy play in creating barriers of social and economic progress, particularly for Black and brown bodies that have been ignored and silenced throughout most of history. As we were saying a little bit earlier, Confederados is definitely one of those parts of history that's not taught in school. And I didn't really hear about it until I think it was about my junior year, I guess, in college. I attended Auburn University in Montgomery, studying history. And my specialty area I was getting ready to specialize in was Reconstruction era. Even though I was doing a lot of civil rights studies and civil rights teaching, I was starting to shift gears towards, Reconstruction. And I randomly found this article, and I can't even tell you what domain or who it was, but I just remember this random article that said, like, Confederate flags in Brazil. And I was just like, well, that's different. But I just kind of like kept it in the back of my head. It wasn't really what I was focused on at the time. And plus I was learning French, not Portuguese. So it didn't really play a big role in my radar. And so 9 months ago, when I started my PhD program and decided I wanted to revisit it, it's definitely something I feel that needs to be explored more and brought to the attention of many Americans, especially in the South, where the Confederacy is so cherished. And I think it will help kind of give a better idea and better explanation of what this heritage actually is when so many people are so fond of denying it. So a little bit about the history of U.S. during the Civil War and Brazil during the Civil War. And if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to jump in or whatever. So as I'm sure many of the listeners know, we have 1865 when the Civil War is coming to an end. But what many listeners may not know is around this time, 1860-ish to about 1865-ish, like a little before the Civil War and throughout the war, there are actually diplomats from Brazil that were kind of going on a little bit throughout the Western Hemisphere, particularly in the Southern United States, in search of bringing people back to the country because there was this really bad economic plight they had with their agriculture, and they just really needed a lot more farmers and a lot more people to hopefully get better crops and plantations going throughout Brazil. So this extended to places in the U.S. and also during this time period a little bit later, reaching out to places in Europe to help bring immigrants in hopes of whitening Brazil, right? There was this, of course, we know about racial hierarchies, right, and social Darwinism and all that kind of stuff, right? So people, even though Darwinism was a little bit after this, but whole idea of whiteness being better, right? And so it's like, hey, let's go bring some white skin here and we'll rape these, enslaved women, and then we won't have as much Black people in 100 years from now. And it's like, psych, trick on you. Didn't work that way. And a little bit of footnote that I didn't realize a lot of people may not know. When it comes to the system of slavery and the history of it with the transatlantic slavery, the U.S. definitely got a portion of enslaved people, around 400,000. But when we look at Brazil got close to 5 million. So you can definitely see the big contrast. Look at those eyes. So you can definitely see a big contrast from the heavy Black presence in Brazil versus the U.S. Whereas in the U.S. it was really concentrated in the South with, and of course in the North, but more so in the South, and then in Brazil throughout various places of the coast. Did you have a question?
You said 5 million?
Close to 5 million. So you're looking at 4.8 million or something like that.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
No, I'm legitimately shocked. Like, I had no idea. Like, I knew about how the transatlantic slave trade like went from North America, South America, etc. But like, I had no idea that. Wow. Like, I'm like, those eyes getting as big as saucers was real. I had no idea. That is a fuck ton. I had no idea it was that much.
Yeah. Outside of the continent of Africa, Brazil has like the highest concentration of Black people, particularly in Bahia, which is coming like northeast Brazil. But if I can find the website or remember it, there's a site, I think it's slave.org or something like that. I'll find it. But it shows like a visual of like the different ships from like the 16th century or 16th century up until like the end of the 19th century, like of slave ships like going across the Atlantic, and you see like the majority of them heading south to South America, particularly after, the slave trade ban in 1808. So you have like ships going everywhere, but then after 1808, you see them just like going all the way down to Brazil. So it's a very sobering and impactful like visual of like, wow, like that's a lot of bodies, and it was a lot. And those are the ones, of course, that survived, right? You have those, untold numbers that died on the trip. So that's a little bit about that background when it comes to Brazil and the U.S. and 1865-ish time period. So, into the Civil War, Union wins, Confederacy loses, yay. And then there were these Confederates who were like, hey, I heard these Brazilian diplomats saying like they could help us out if we just go to South America to kind of like start anew. Let's do that, because we don't want to be around Black people and view them as people. Like, we don't want to be in a government ruled by the Yankees and like, be under this tyranny, supposedly. So they, there's no like exact count of a number of hundreds of families, but there are definitely hundreds and hundreds of families. I think the last rough estimate that was taken, like I think in the 80s actually, was around a total of about 50,000 people. So we just have all these hundreds of families that went down to Brazil. Now, just because they went down, that doesn't mean they stayed there. So I do want to highlight that. But a good significant portion of the Confederados, which they were later called, did stay. So much so that many of their descendants are still in Brazil today. And as I said in the beginning, they, still honor the Confederacy, with the holiday, the end of April, there's that Confederate holiday that is like, I think still being celebrated in Alabama. It's also celebrated in, Sao Paulo and Santo Baptista and Americana, like in all these spots in South Brazil. They have the same holiday where they fry chicken and they wear those, antebellum dresses, and they try to speak in a southern drawl and accent, but it's also like Portuguese and like Brazilian, so it's weird. But so that's still being honored today because of
that. Is surreal. Like that sounds like that's something that like here when that happens, like when we see that happening, because it's just like I'm just picturing very specifically like Kappa Alpha fraternities formal, which is literally called Old South, and like all of the brothers dress up in Confederate uniforms, and their dates like have to go like to costume shops to rent fucking hoop skirts and shit. And like this is something that we make fun of because it's stupid and antiquated and racist as fuck. So the idea of this just being like a widely accepted popular holiday in a fucking foreign country is mind-blowing.
Well,
Madison, what you just talked about should be like the next Jordan Peele movie. Like that just sounds like a fucking horror movie.
Now, I do want to like clarify. I wouldn't say it's a widespread holiday, right? It's not Carnival or like Easter, but it is like for those communities. It is like a big thing, and it draws attention. But it's not like a big thing throughout the whole country, right? Just in kind of those neck of the woods.
I just want to hear that. I just want to hear that accent. That South American, the South, like old Southern, like combination. It's got to be some wild shit.
That Pascagoula Portuguese.
I'm looking, if hopefully I'll get a chance to go there to continue my research further, and I'll get a chance to hear it in person, and more than likely I'll be recording it so I can just like pre-play it and just laugh and laugh and laugh. But it's going to be even weirder, right? Because I'm going to be there. I'm like, yeah, I'm from Alabama, and they're going to think everyone from Alabama sounds like me when they don't. But anyway, back to 1866. So 65 wars over. 66, we start seeing families go down to Brazil. Predominantly, one of the most famed families is the Norris family. And all this information that I'm about to share with you is what I've studied and found through the Alabama Department of Archives and History. They have an amazing collection there about the Confederados. A lot of their handwritten letters and diaries are stored there. So if you want to check it out, you know, you can go and look at these old tiny letters and be like, wow, wow. So Colonel William Hutchinson Norris, he was born in Georgia, but he was a senator for Alabama. And after the war, he was like, all right, fam, we're going to Brazil. And he's a big family. The Durr family was a big clan, the McMullans, Keys, Judkins, like all these different big prominent families in Alabama were instrumental when it came to being some of the first settlers in the Confederate colonies. And I think it's obvious to maybe the listeners and us in this podcast right now to say like, yeah, they definitely want to go down there so they can continue to practice slavery. But most of the history that's about them, that's been published about them, of course, by all these white historians, they all try to say like, no, it had nothing to do with slavery. They just wanted to go, you know, have a new life. They didn't want to have a Yankee wool and, you know.
Heritage. It's heritage, not hate, Madison. This is my heritage. You can have your heritage. I can have my heritage too.
I'll go down to Brazil and
So it's like that thing, like,
Calls.
what's that? Oh, no.
It's like the sequel to Lost Cause.
Exactly, right? It's that same sort of mindset, the same sort of like, no, nothing to do with slavery. We just want to continue our lifestyle, which happen to have slaves, and like, you know, not deal with the Yankees. And that's how a lot of historians have been like trying to like emphasize that through most of the 20th century. Like I said, there haven't been a lot of historians that have written about it. I've pretty much finished reading everything that's been published about the Confederados. And yeah, so they have this like very like persistent narrative about that. There are a few scholars here and there that will say like, oh, it's bullshit, like clearly. But they don't really dive into much detail. So that's what my goal is, to try to fill in that gap. But you go back to these letters and these diaries, again, that you can find at the Department of Archives. I mean, in these letters, they have these quotes that say like, yeah, we're here to buy some slaves. Yeah, we're here to like try to plant some cotton, which, by the way, isn't really best grown in southern Brazil where they were. I don't know if you've ever had Brazilian cotton. I haven't, probably for a reason. But in that part of the country, when the Confederados were arriving, they were making a shift from sugar, because beet sugar was like really kicking off in Europe. So like sugar wasn't as like prominent as a crop in Brazil. And they were starting to like switch more towards coffee. But the Confederados were like, well, we got cotton, we can do that. But unfortunately, it didn't really work out too well for them. But back to this idea of owning people. What I found really, really funny in some of these letters I was reading through, was from Colonel Norris. And in one of his early letters, you know, he talks about how happy he is to be in Brazil. And, you know, this is like in 1873, so he's kind of been there for a while already. And he's talking about the different Negroes he's paid for and how he plans to buy so many more, and the beauty of the Brazilian paradise, all these sorts of things. And then, as you may or may not know, slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888. So we have the first Confederados arrived in Brazil in 1866, and enjoying the bliss of human bondage. And then Brazil has this system in place. They start like abolishing slavery step by step. They don't do it like overnight, kind of like how we did here, supposedly did here. But it was more like a gradual process. Like, okay, people of this age, okay, mothers, okay, people at this, so it was like different increment levels. But in that time period, the Confederados were taking as much as they could get. So going back to Norris, what I found so funny was, in these letters from 66, 73, all these things, he's talking about how wonderful and happy he is there. And then on the 25th of May, 1888, he says, "This is the gloomiest period of my life. By the laws of Brazil, all our Negroes are free. This whole country is in a demoralized condition," right? And so it's like, he's talking about
the motherfucker was basically like, "Oh man, we just got here. What do you mean it's over with?"
Oh my God, that's right.
He's like, "Oh damn it, not again, not again."
We're moving to Germany.
Sorry, I had a little cough there. Yeah, so there's that happened. And of course, he's not the only one to say this, right? Like all the families I listed earlier, all the have been very, very similar. One of my favorite experiences is this, I think it was the Judd family. I can't remember exactly, but there was one family who was talking about in his letter how his father had agreed to pay for like so many slaves. And a tidbit about the Confederados, they refused to learn Portuguese. Like they were like, "We're going to speak English here." Like they just didn't have to learn Portuguese.
This is Brazil. Speak English.
So they didn't want to learn Portuguese. And of course that affected the way transactions were understood. So in one transaction, this one Confederado was writing a letter to some friends back home saying how his father was like, he had paid like this amount of money for these slaves, but like half the slaves were like either dead or like infirm. I was like, and like how, again, they don't have like an unlimited amount of money, even though they, did have some wealth when they came, they don't have this unlimited. So it's like you waste all these money on dead bodies because you refuse to like learn the language. All right, cool. But yeah, so the Confederates get there and they fit in pretty well with the hardcore slaveholders that were already present. There are three types of planters, I should say. There are three types of planters that are in Brazil at the time, right? So you have the hardcore slaveholders, which you would see like in like Django Unchained, right? Think Candy from Django. So you have those. You have like the traditional plantation owners who are like, okay, we understand that we can't plant certain things anymore. And even though it's a comfortable lifestyle, we're going to kind of hold on to it, but we're not going to like, kill people over it. Like if it changes, we'll adapt. And then you have like, the progressive planners who are like, okay, yeah, this is going to be the last generation. We are done. We understand this in a very historic context, but we don't want it for our current and future and for our children. So you have like those type of planners that are in the country. Is that a hand? Okay. And the Confederates kind of slip right in with those hardcore slave owners. So then you have stories of the Confederados' obstacles that they were encountering. One, the language barrier, because they didn't want to learn Portuguese. To the fact that they're in a predominantly Catholic country and they're, Protestants. And so there was like this whole big tough about like burying their bodies because it's like, well, we're not going to have, this kind of Catholic area graveyard. We're going to have, we want like a Protestant presence. And Brazil was like, that's not really our thing. And of course, like the Afro-Brazilians and slaves are like, bitch, if we can like modify our lives, like you can do the same, like just incorporate some of your customs with Catholicism. It's not a big deal. But the Confederados, it was. So we have those sorts of accounts happening, and my goal is to see how this influences the nuances of racial identity, right? So in Brazil, unlike here in the States where it's very like you're black, you're white, or you're biracial, right? Or you're Latinx, it's very like, that. In Brazil, it's such a range of different identities, right? And everyone wants to be the closest to whiteness. No one wants to be preto. No one wants to be preto Latino. No one wants to be those kind of things because not only does it mean your skin is dark, but it just means like that you're at the bottom of the social level. Brazilians have this way of reframing their racism, saying like, we're not racist. We just don't like the way blackness looks. And it's like, racism, right? And like, it just be better if it was right. And it's like, that's racism. I'm like, no, it's not racism. It just looks better white. So, classism, of course, which is tied a lot with racism, obviously. But there's, of course, this class mentality. The higher you are, the whiter kind of you are. And that, of course, is, seen in many ways in American life. But because Brazil didn't have those hardcore Jim Crow and segregation laws like we had here, it's kind of melded and blended more so in their minds and scholars' minds as more of just like social status more so than colorisms or racism with skin tone. So my goal is to try to like see where the Confederados fit in that, because they have entries in their letters and diaries saying that they are the superior race, not just to the surrounding Black and brown bodies, Black and Indigenous bodies that are present, but to even white Brazilians, they're superior to them as well. So I just want to kind of see where those conversations intersect, and how they play a role into conversations today. They have that Confederate holiday they celebrate in southern Brazil, but it doesn't get celebrated without resistance, right? So there are definitely activist groups there who are like, fuck this shit, like, no, like, don't do this. And of course, the Confederado descendants are like, oh, it's not about race, it's about heritage. So, that's kind of like a quick kind of summary of the Confederados and where I am in my research. My goal is just going to make a more ethnographic approach when I get there and just kind of conduct my own interviews with both Black activists and Confederate descendants. Granted, I get my Portuguese down.
So what is it like researching something that marries, like, because I think that we have like this, very deep universal understanding of racism in the American South. And I think that you very aptly pointed out that it's not only parallel to, but it's married to the legacy of racism in the global South. Like, what kind of obstacles, like, do you find researching that? Because, like, this, like, the concept of the global South, like, I feel like is really relatively new to a lot of people. So it's how are you able to access things right now as you research this?
Yeah, so right now, most of my research is limited to what's available here in the States. In Brazil, their archive system and even arrangement is so opposite of what we have here. So when I do get down there, it's going to be a struggle, I know. I thankfully have an affiliate now who has like sent me pictures, and I'm just like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to do this. But it's going to be exciting. But even here in the States, some of the biggest obstacles I've encountered is just finding those Black voices and finding those Indigenous voices, because unlike here in the States, there are a significant higher number of Black bodies and brown bodies that were literate and that could read and write and make diary entries. Yes, here in the States too, but as we said before, 400,000 versus 5 million, right? So that is what I want to dig more into once I get to Brazil to find those records. Another obstacle I've had is, again, fighting this discussion of racism, because in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, Brazil as a racial democracy really kicked off, right? So because it's a racial democracy, that means we can't have racism. So they're like saying my research is ineffective, because it's like, what do you mean? You mean classism? You mean like, and I'm like, okay, but racism too. And that's an obstacle a lot of scholars face, right? Especially when they want to publish material that is new, and hopefully groundbreaking, and hopefully, worthy of a big audience. There's always obstacles like, what doesn't exist yet? It's like, yeah, because I got to write it, and then it'll exist. So that's kind of an obstacle, but I think those would be like general obstacles a lot of PhD students and scholars face. Hi, Will.
Yes, Brother Williams entered the chat.
It's good to see you, Madison.
Good to see you too.
I've been back for 9648 days.
9643.
9643.
Yeah.
That was our bus number, guys. Madison and I are old friends.
Madison, real quick, going back to, I guess, when the Confederados are leaving the U.S. for Brazil, was this encouraged by? I mean, I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say is like, was there any pushback in the U.S. or like in the South for them leaving? Like, I figured like that's a huge influx of capital leaving the U.S. and going to Brazil. I'm guessing at that point, like, was this encouraged by the federal government or encouraged by anyone? Or are they just like, hey, fuck this place, I'm a racist and I want to go to Brazil?
From what I've gathered so far, and again, 9 months in, so I still got a ways to go, but from what I've gathered so far, most of the support that the Confederados received was from Brazil, right? Like, they funded the transportation, they funded the, stay initially, they really give them a lot of startups. And I don't see anywhere where the U.S. is like, we're going to help you with this. In part because they were still recovering from a war. And the only pushback that I've read so far has been from family members that are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, Brazil, what? So I don't really see a lot of like governmental opposition to it. But again, maybe I just haven't gotten to that part yet.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Like, what was the reaction from the Brazilian population? All these white folks coming in from America, they're like, what are these crackers doing here? Like, why are they coming here? You know what I mean? It's like,
hey, y'all, we're fresh off the boat.
They must have been like,
thanks for having us.
They're like, oh God, no, not again.
Where is that quote? Hang on, there was actually a diary entry that made me think, oh, okay, so this is from the diary of Julia Keyes from April of 1869. And she says, it is lonesome at, oh geez, my handwriting is awful. Okay. It is lonesome here. It is lonesome here. We have no society worth speaking of. The Brazilians, of course, are not suitable associates for us. How can there ever be any congeniality between two races so entirely unlike? These customs are not the same. So we see this continued sense of entitlement, right, with the Confederados when they get to Brazil. And it's not as if they were plopped in the middle of like a lot of blackness surrounding them, because there were still white elite populations that were in southern Brazil. Now, granted, they colonized a lot of like farmland, right? But even in some more like city-like places on the coast, when they would sometimes have like vacation houses, or what we would call vacation houses today, they were still among a lot of white people. So yes, there were a lot of black bodies there, but even among the white population, they are very like, we're above them. I'm hoping when I get to Brazil, I can answer the second half of that as far as like the Brazilian response, because all I have right now is the American response here in our archives, which is funny because a lot of the letters are begging for the families and friends here in the States to write to them. So like, please write to us. We're so lonely. We're so sad. We don't have any friends here. We can't make, and like none of their American friends, none of their U.S. family members are like, no. And like, please send us money. Please talk. And it's like, never, ever. And it's like, one letter was so sad.
They should have learned fucking Portuguese. They wouldn't be so lonely.
You would think, right?
Inshallah, Will.
To what extent was the Golden Circle ideology related to like white Confederado flight to Brazil?
You're gonna have to explain that to me. I don't know what the
Will, you just fucking willed all
God
over
damn it.
this.
Bill is always like, did you hear that like Admiral Akbar invaded the Golan Heights back in 1850? Like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude?
I'm talking about the idea that that the CSA would eventually encompass the Caribbean, would spread to Mexico and Cuba. And I'm wondering if they thought that they were going to have a revival or if they were going to launch another version of this.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the criticisms that historians have about the Confederados, or one of the responses rather, that historians have about the Confederados is like, they didn't go to Brazil for slavery, because if they wanted to do that, they could have gone to Cuba, because there was still like slavery in Cuba, right? Which takes out so many different elements. So I say that because they did go to other places besides Brazil. Brazil was just kind of the hot spot, but they did go to Mexico. They did go to Cuba. And I think it was, from my records, as far as the Confederados in Brazil, they weren't so much looking for like a revival in that the South will rise as the global South, but more so as a, we're just going to keep doing our shit for our family. If it spreads, cool. If not, we're going to do our best to preserve it as long as we can. But there were Confederados in other places throughout Latin America, just not as high a population. And I think the goal was more alongside what you were explaining, just not so much in Brazil, though, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a super dark fucking timeline where there's Confederate Castro.
Oh.
I don't like that. Never say those words again. That's too dark for me.
That is banned from the podcast.
I can't. I've got too much shit on my plate to process that as a hypothetical. So you said that the Brazilian government funded this and like helped them flee North America, paid for passage, helped them get set up where they were there. Was there any like moments of regret from the Brazilian government when these other people got here and were like, by the way, thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much for paying for our travel expenses. But also now we're just going to shit on everything that you're doing. And you all should be like, we know that you're Americans because this is South America, but we want you to be like Americans. Like, was there any point at which the Brazilian government were like, fuck, these guys actually do suck, even though they're also super pro-slavery like us? Like, how did that play out, like that investment?
I don't think there was as much interest from the government for social affairs as far as maybe just economic benefits, right? So it's like, are they making us money? Are they stirring up like a war, a battle? No, then they're good, whatever. I don't think it was so much as a like, ooh, like maybe this wasn't the best idea, because again, many of them went back to the States as well. I'll probably get a bigger picture of that when I do get to Brazil. But as far as I know, especially because it was in a time when things were shifting so much, in Brazil, when it came to abolition and when it came to just their type of government, I think the Confederates kind of took like a back seat. So they weren't too prominent in more larger conversations. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How many of these folks were fleeing because they were scared of being prosecuted? Like how many
from
of these people?
From the States?
Yeah.
I don't think there are any fears of prosecution from any of the letters I've been reading or writing. It was more so of just, damn, let's go someplace new. But I haven't read anything about like any fears of retributions or anything like that. There were some who were afraid of like uprisings happening, just some paranoid fucks who were like, oh God, the blacks are going to kill us now. But that was the only like sort of like fear fleeing it. It was more so just like we'd rather be someplace where we can practice our livelihood freely without being stifled.
They were probably like, these motherfuckers keep turning their horses left and calling it fucking NASCAR. What the fuck is this?
Probably.
Madison, where will you be going in Brazil?
I hope to go to Santa Barbara da Esta and Americana, which are like kind of neighboring towns in São Paulo.
This is in the south?
Yeah, so this is like South Brazil, like São Paulo. It's a little bit to the west of Rio. And I also want to go to Rio for their archives. And I also want to hit a spot in northern Brazil in the state of Para. This two towns called Belém and Santarém. There's a judicial archive there for some of the colonies. Again, not as many in northern Brazil as in the south, but there are some colonies that I want to touch because they aren't really discussed that much. And because they're a little bit more inland, I want to see how they progress with, I imagine, a significantly smaller number of enslaved people, but I could be wrong. So I want to see if I'm wrong or right. But yeah, most are like in what they call Americana and Santa Barbara. Dress. I think they pronounce it.
We have at least one confirmed fan in Brazil.
One confirmed
Gabriel?
fan?
Yeah, we've got a listener in Brazil. At least one.
Yeah, I think we have at least one, but according to the data, I think we have like a few. So you may run into people that know the podcast there that have heard this episode. Hell yeah!
Shout out to all Brazilian fans.
Oh yeah, that would be cool.
Tommy, do you have something?
Yeah. Okay. So I sort of have like a loaded question. So I'm going to preface this by saying, like, I know when, slavery was abolished, a few slave owners, decided to withhold some of that information. So I'm wondering, like, when these people fled to Brazil, like, did they take slaves with them? Like, did they have to start over from scratch? Like, did they sell their plantations? Like, what? And how much did the Brazilian government help them with that? Like, did they just have to buy like a whole new crew of slaves? Did they, what was that like?
That's a really great question, and was one of my first questions when I started researching. So Brazilian law prohibited slaves from being imported. We know there are ways around the law, but as far as I can tell from my research, the Confederados did not bring any of their enslaved people with them. When they left the state, a lot of times they would leave their properties to family members to keep. These are the family members who are like crazy to go to Brazil. And in many cases, it was good that they were kept because they ended up coming back after like a couple of years or so, right? Some people just couldn't afford that upkeep or didn't have the families to keep it because the family was all going to Brazil. And in those cases, I read of one letter of someone that was corresponding to someone else in, I think, Texas, about some property and land. But it always just ended with like what is happening to it? Like, has it been sold? What's going on? But because nobody wrote back to these fuckers, like they were just always kind of like in limbo about like, yeah. So sometimes I felt bad, like, oh, no one ever wrote back. What happened? It's like, so yeah. So when they did get to Brazil, the Brazilian government helped them with like with finding the land and helping with like a certain percentage amount to pay, right? So a lot of the Confederados who came to Brazil were of the wealthy plantation class, right? So they did have some funds. But here's the thing, like, because there were so many slaves in Brazil compared to the number in the United States, they were literally like a dime a dozen. Like they were really, really, I hate to use the word cheap, but they were really cheap because there were just so many of them, right? So there are accounts of like you would read about, you know how there are laws here in the States, even though they weren't always followed. There were laws like you can't kill your slave, you can't beat them up, you can't do these sorts of things. But of course, people broke the laws. But at the same time, here in the States, people are like, yeah, I did pay a pretty penny on you, so I'm going to try to get as much work out of you and as many babies out of you and all these sorts of things, right, for that kind
They
of investment.
didn't view the property as being as fungible as the Brazilian view was.
Say it one more time?
Like, so you're saying that, like, because of availability, like, the property was devalued, essentially.
Exactly.
God, I don't like saying these terms because I'm talking about human
I know, right?
beings.
We're talking about
God, I'm just so fucking cringe.
I totally get you, yeah. And that's actually needs to be part of the language I'm working on too. But exactly right. So someone, an enslaved person in Brazil could be killed or murdered or literally worked to death, and it's like, that's all right, we got. So go back to you, Tommy, about like buying enslaved people in Brazil. The cost wasn't as high as it was here in the U.S. So that did give them a little bit more leverage, not leverage, but a little bit more ease when it came to adjusting to life in Brazil. That's not to say that they still weren't up. They still didn't have some price tag to it because it was after the supposed ban of importing enslaved people from Africa. So it was after that ban, but and it was in a time when slavery was slowly in steps when slavery was starting to be ended in steps, but still not as costly as here in the States.
I got like post World War II, you had like the Nazi hunters and shit who went into Argentina like hunting for Nazis. Was there like any kind of people who tried to either extradite or come there and try to kill ex-Confederates?
Try to kill the Confederates?
Yeah, was there anybody like gunning for them down there because of like?
I hope so.
You just ruined the plot to Django 2.
I'd watch that movie.
Django 2, the Confederados.
I'd fucking watch that movie.
Hell yeah.
Didn't Pedro say anything about this, or did he? I mean, is there a government?
He was
policy?
behind a lot of it. He was like, he actually welcomed them. Like,
Yeah, you missed that part, Will. Like
I'm
the Brazilian government, the Brazilian government was like funding people
wanted
coming
that
down there.
revenue.
Yeah, they were just like, "Come to us, we'll take you.
Yeah.
You guys are great at running plantations. Come do it with us. It'll be a great time."
he actually
Brazil.
some of the first people, including I think Norris, the Norris clan, like some of the first people that arrived in Brazil, Don Pedro was there to welcome and greet them and lavish them with this fancy.
They got off the boat. They were like handed a caipirinha and were like, "Here are your first 200 slaves. Like, go have fun."
So yeah.
Like a really fucked up Ellis Island, really.
Oh. I was trying to see if there was I wrote so many fun quotes on here, and now I can't think.
Madison, you said these communities were really like these Confederado communities really like it's stuck together. So like after a lot of them go back, the ones that stayed, they basically kind of kept to themselves. So like, I don't want to put this in like the stereotypical like Southern inbreeding way, but like I like okay.
Were they cockeyed cousin fuckers?
Were they cockeyed cousin fuckers? Number one, but two, I'm guessing is like I picture like gated like communities of like it's only Confederate descendants. Like I'm just trying to get in my head like the ones that are still there, the descendants of them. I take it that they live pretty lavishly and they're pretty like lived in like I don't know. I guess picture like gated communities and like of antebellum plantation homes. Like it's I don't know.
South American Pike Road.
Oh my God! Yes.
South American Pike Road.
There's a question in there somewhere, but I'm just like, I guess like, what do you know what it looks like
how
today?
did
Like
they
not having
get out into the population? Like how
like,
they still alive?
Did they like finally learn Portuguese, or like we're gonna assimilate and just be like Bolsonaro and a fascist, or like did they? I don't know. Like what's it like today?
So they stopped. So slavery ended in South America 1888, and around 1900s when you stopped seeing Southerners come to Brazil. So like you have this time span from 1865 to about 1902, I think might have been the last ship to go over there.
So they were basically, oh God, now they're unionizing. We really got to get to Brazil.
And then once those Confederados stopped coming, or once they started heading back to the States, it's around like the early 1900s, you start to see it not necessarily dissolve, but start to try to integrate more with the Brazilian society. You still have these clusters that will, hold on to that Southern heritage, of course, but, you start seeing families that are learning Portuguese and that are like, building families, not with Black people, but like with, lighter skin, lighter tone people. So it's not a pure blood, and I don't think they have this mindset of having like a pure Confederate blood like we may envision with a lot of like white supremacist groups. But their mindset is more so like a pure like history, heritage kind of idea. And it's like we came from these people who fled tyranny for freedom. Not so much when they first got here. They definitely wanted to keep it pure when they got here. But once they realized that, realistically, it wasn't going to thrive into this utopia they may have envisioned, you're like, okay, I guess we should learn Obrigada and Denada.
Yeah. So they integrated in what like Brazilians consider whiteness. So like they just okay. So like that upper class like white Brazilian, what we think like when we like I'm just using him as an example because he's a fucking horrible person. Like what Bolsonaro looks like when you look at people like him, like you're like he looks European. Like he doesn't look like what you would imagine someone in South America to look like. So like that whole like upper class white Brazilian stuff is like what they basically ended up assimilating in when they couldn't keep being like down in Brazil.
Well, they're regionalist. Banjo comes from Africa, but no.
Got his ass.
Hell yeah! I was saying, this is gonna be the one. This is gonna be the episode where like, God damn it! God damn it! The past two fucking episodes. Oh my God.
But no, to complement your question, does that make sense? So this is also like 1900 time frame is also when we start seeing Russians start to immigrate to Brazil. We start seeing Italians immigrate to Brazil, and even Japanese start immigrating to Brazil. So you have like these large clusters of non-Black people that are arriving to Brazil as well. So,
hey, I want to comment on that because I'm watching my co-hosts look very, very confused.
Tommy heard Japanese.
No. I didn't know like Brazil was this like haven for like all of this.
It's not like I was in the middle of a fucking sentence.
Sorry, my bad.
I swear to God, Madison, these dudes are just like, oh, Kate's saying something. I'm gonna go now, but no, like it's a common thing where it's an example of like American exceptionalism, where it's like we think about like immigration, particularly out of Europe, and just like we have this vision of it was just people flooding through Ellis Island and that was it. But it's like my family came to America from fucking Cuba, like. There is a massive Jewish population in Cuba. Like this, like the United States of America was not like the stop for hundreds upon thousands of people who were leaving Europe. And that is something that we have just like invented in our own minds.
Well, that's, we're their best, we're exceptional, and there are no cats in America, right? So.
And the streets are paved with cheese. I can't watch.
Oh my God.
I can't watch the openings. Like I can't watch the opening scene of An American Tail when it's like because it's a pogrom, but it's like the cats, like the Cossacks are cats.
Holy
like,
shit, you're
ransacking this little Ukrainian village. I literally can't watch it because I start crying every time because that is like just a weird anthropomorphized version of exactly what actually happened to my family, and it's so fucking triggering. I can't watch the beginning of An American Tail.
I did not mean to bring those emotions.
No, you're all good because I'm not gonna like go home and just be like, I'm gonna watch An American Tail now. But just like legit, like like that darling childhood story of like tiny little mice living the American dream by building the Mouse of Minsk and overthrowing their oppressors, like fucking makes me cry as a 35-year-old woman.
I'm sorry.
And that's why we're all communists, because we were indoctrinated by the communist propaganda.
I was radicalized by Fievel.
Oh.
Oh my God. All right, y'all. Well, any closing remarks? Anyone got anything else they want to say? Madison, you have any closing remarks to sum up cockeyed cousin fuckers moving to Brazil?
Yeah, just a reminder that, like I said in the beginning, I'm 9 months into this, so I know I still have a mountain to go, but it's going to be exciting. And yeah. So excuse if I said anything, if I use any incorrect terminology.
You just have to come back and follow up.
Yeah, we're going to have a part 2.
We'll see you in a year.
Everything we say is partially incorrect.
Well, the information is valid and accurate, like that part. But I might have I know a lot of times I say American when I should have said United States, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You killed it. You killed it. Trust me. I don't research anything.
I learned something today. Will, you're looking like you have something to say.
No, I wanted to, I guess at the very end here, plug my favorite Brazilian soccer club, Esporte Clube de Bahia. And they are, I think, Brazil's only pro-LGBT soccer club. They're super progressive up in the north there. And if anybody deserves your support there, they do.
Oh, well, I told, and I'm in the middle of writing a grant, and I said that, for my leisure activity, and my time to blend with the community, if I get to go to Brazil, will be spent with Michael Jackson fan base. So they don't care about us, but shot in 2 prominent favelas in Brazil.
That's right, yeah.
That's all we're doing. Sorry.
If could you meet the person who stabbed Bolsonaro on his campaign run, and can you get their autograph?
I don't know what kind of superpowers you think I have. I mean, I am a goddess, but I mean.
I thought you had that Thanos power. You could just snap and everything's better.
Come on the show.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you, Madison, for coming on. I messaged real quick before I do the outro. I messaged everyone this screenshot. I'm not going to say names or where, but the podcast got someone a full-time teaching job because.
Yeah, congratulations, nameless listener. That was so exciting, and I literally cried.
That was so fucking awesome. The principal was like, "You listen to it too," and apparently, Tyler, it all started because he said your classic line, "Good Lord willing, the creek don't rise." He's like, "You listen to them too," and apparantly
that's so weird to me that it's fully associated with us now because it's a fucking relatively common phrase. I love that people associate it here.
Yeah.
The first time I heard it was on a Hank Williams radio show, so I was like, that's good. I got to steal that for the podcast.
I've heard that so often growing up.
Yeah, that's common parlance. It's but
the devil being his wife.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited that there's educators out there who are just I listen to those idiots.
What happened is no one said it as good as I did.
You haven't said it in a while, so you have to. When I'm done with the outro, you have to end it with that, Tyler.
Last episode I was on.
Did you? When was the last time you were on? I forget.
Not last week, but the week before.
That is true. All right, y'all.
Thank you, Madison.
Thank you again, Madison. Yeah.
Thank you, Madison.
Will. I've missed you. Thank you.
I miss you. Come see me.
We have a reunion on the podcast. Oh, man. All right, y'all. At Dixieland, the proletariat, we believe the South will rise again, but this time for the right reasons, those being worker-owned means of production, decolonization, and self-determination for all oppressed peoples. Make sure to follow, and subscribe to us on social media at Dixie Prole. We are coming to you from the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, Montgomery, Alabama, and the Bluff City, Memphis, Tennessee. We would also like to recognize that we are recording on occupied land that rightfully belongs to the Muskogee and Chickasaw nations. Thank you again, Madison, for coming on. And Tyler, send us out.
Well, good Lord willing and the creek don't rise. We'll see y'all next week.